The great hall was full of moving shadows. Torches burned on the rock walls. The flames reached high and threw strange shapes that looked a lot like beasts. Thick smells filled the air. Sweet honey mead bubbled in a bronze pot. The scent, it was like candy, but underneath it was the sharp smell of fire and something like old blood. It wasn't fresh blood. It was blood that had been cooked into the drink. Giants sat around a long table. Their laughter sounded like thunder, and their voices echoed until the roof shook. Their teeth cracked on bones as they ate, and their fists slammed their cups. They ate heavy meals of roasted ox and goat. It was a feast, but none of them cared so much about the food. They stared at the center of the room, at the cauldron that hissed and steamed like it was a dragon chained to the fireplace. This was the mead of poetry. It was not an ordinary drink. It was the blood of a wise being, and his blood was mixed with honey, and it promised something no sword could ever win: the gift of poetry. Words sharp enough to cut kings and sweet enough to entice anyone. Every giant knew how precious it was, but no one dared take a sip without permission. Then a stranger who stood at the edge of the firelight with hood pulled down. His shoulders were hunched like a man who spent his days in a field. To them, he was nobody, a drifter, a servant, a shadow. But if they had looked closer, if they had seen the quick glimmer in his eye and the small twitch in his mouth, they might have guessed something different. This was none other than Odin. Tonight, he would take on a smaller role, someone who looked a lot like a farmhand, like a lone wanderer. But under his cloak, his mind, it spun like a storm of clouds, and he didn't come for their food or for their fire, and he definitely didn't come for their loud laughter. He wanted what was in the cauldron. His mission was to obtain the mead of poetry, to obtain it for the gods and for humanity. This was a heist of epic proportions. This was the original one-man heist. Forget your casino money and your crown jewels. This treasure was a treasure of words, song, and the power to shape memory itself. The stakes were high. If he failed, the giants would end him, and humanity would never know the beauty of poetry. Odin watched, and he waited as giants fought over the last scraps. A woman sung off in the distance, but even her song seemed to turn towards the cauldron. The steam curled up, shining in the firelight, and the smell, it was sweet, rich, and dizzying. Odin's thirst was deeper than his hunger. He thirsted for creativity itself, for a spark that would outlast him, and he imagined poets, Skalds, using this power to invent words, to create stories, and to use them to etch their place in history like a runestone. All of that power, it sat in one vat. The moments stretched on. The giant lifted his horn, it tipped it back to finish what was left. Half of it he swallowed, and the other half spilled down his beard. The pot continued to hiss. Odin's fingers curled around his cloak, waiting for the moment when he could drop his disguise and move in. He smiled to himself. He already knew how the story would end. He could see it. He played it through 1,000 times, and each rehearsal ended with wings beating against the night and the magic mead secured for the Asir and humanity. To steal this mead was to steal the very power of persuasion, poetry, and propaganda. He knew one mistake meant death, but he also knew that silence and not taking the risk meant something far worse: a world without creative words, stories, or songs. They say the first poem came from a wound, before giants built halls of stone and before men learned to braid truth and myth into one rope, a rope that would anchor Norse lore for centuries. The Norse gods made a being. They called him Kvasir. He was full of wisdom, and he answered every question. He spoke with profound clarity, and no riddle could defeat him. But when ability surpasses what others don't have, admiration turns to assassination. Two dwarves, jealous and proud, cut his throat and caught his blood in a basin. They mixed it with honey, knowing that the blood of Kvasir was the source of his words of wisdom. They were very careful, as all dwarves are when crafting mythological weapons. And make no mistake, this was the most powerful weapon in Norse mythology. What they made from the honey and blood was a mead that glowed like the morning sun, and they trapped it in a bottle. It sang when it boiled, and it hissed when it cooled. When a drop touched stone, the stone seemed to tell a story of memories past. This drink was named the Mead of Poetry. One mouthful made words sharper than a sword, smoother than sailing across the glassy fjord at dawn. And it was sweeter than anything found in Midgard. It gave the drinker's tongue a path to everyone's heart. Any thought could be made a gift or a weapon. With the mead, words could nail a man's honor to the wall with a single verse, or enshrine him forever in tales of the sagas. Either way, no one would ever forget. Swords cut bodies. Wounds are temporary, even fatal ones. But songs and stories, they survive forever. Naturally, everyone wanted it. The giants kept it. They poured the mead into 3 large vats, and they hid them in a mountain. They set strong guards and told many lies to hide the truth that this drink sat in the hill quietly boiling, far away from everyone who sought to gain its power. And so from a distance, Odin watched. He watched and he thought about Midgard. He thought about the world where men fought but had no names to leave behind. He wanted more than victory. He wanted memory. He wanted words that could live on. He made a plan, careful, like carving a rune into stone. First, he disguised himself. He put on rough wool and dust, rubbed blisters on his heels, and he walked like a man whose life was hard work. He found a giant named Bogi, with arms like ship masts and an imagination of a sea cucumber. Bogi needed a farmhand. Odin needed his trust. So Odin milked angry cows and worked behind a plow that bit the earth like a dragon gnawing a bone. He learned which guard drank too much, which sister whispered secrets, which words made Bogi's eyes twitch. At night, he sat at the threshold and he watched the stars stretch across the sky. He chewed bitter stalks and weighed risk 100 times. He didn't bring loud heroes. He brought patience, a knife, and a hunger that wasn't just in his stomach. After a season of hard work, Odin asked Bogi for his favor. "I only need a hole," he whispered. Bogi respected his quest, drilled into the mountain. There was a small hole through the rock, and when he was done, Odin thanked him and the giant was sent home. Alone, Odin pressed his face into the hole. He heard a faint sound of liquid moving, and he could smell the honey and the blood. He smiled, and he shapeshifted into a serpent. And then as a serpent, he was able to slide through the hole, through the tunnel, his ribs counting the walls like beads. He moved like a ribbon into the dark, and he could taste the honey, the blood, and the fire. And he arrived quietly, and inside, silence. 3 big vats, like sleeping beasts. The room smelled sweet, like the beginning of fall. And on the bench by the nearest vat, sat a woman. Her hair looked like wet bark. Her eyes were calm as winter. She was Gunnloth. She guarded the mead because she could not be fooled. Odin changed back into a man, not a farmhand, but someone else. His shoulders were broad, his mouth crooked, his voice kind and dangerous at the same time. "Who are you?" she asked. "A thirsty traveler," he replied, "and I walked through a mountain just for a drink." She laughed softly. "There are easier wells," she said. "Not for what I want," he replied. He didn't beg right away. He told her stories like fishermen throwing bites of bread before dropping the hook. He spoke of long, cold nights where only words kept people warm. He told her of kings who ate their own children and warriors whose deeds faded like colors in the rain. He made the mead sound like a promise the world had forgotten to keep. She listened. She was kind, but she was not foolish. She had been given a task that required both strength and softness. She saw two men, the one who spoke and the one behind his eye. She was tired of watching something that nobody ever asked about except to steal it. He asked to stay one night. She said, "Fine." He slept on the floor of the hall, and in the morning he asked again, showing more of himself. She was lonely, the way guardians are sometimes. And so when he asked for a drink, she said yes, but with a warning in her voice, and she poured him a mouthful. The mead hit his tongue like a star exploding. It filled him with warmth that wasn't heat. Doors in his mind swung open. He tasted wild lands, grammar, battle, lullabies, birth cries, and oaths. He almost forgot his own plan. The two spent the rest of the day talking, sharing stories, and the second night they talked more until the torches burned down. He asked about the first song that she loved. She asked about his name, who he was. He didn't answer directly. Some truths are told by circling around them. She let him touch the vat. When he lifted his hand, there was a line of gold on his palm, as if the drink had marked him. And then, on the third night, he asked for 3 sips. A poor man's request, he joked. She thought carefully and said, 3? Then you go. He lifted his first cup and he drank. The hall seemed to grow to fit what he had become. He lifted the second. He lifted the third, just a sip, according to the deal, and some cosmic scales broke, because a god does not sip when the world is waiting. He did not drink greedily. He drank completely. With those sips, he emptied the vats. But here's the thing about Odin. He was a trickster. And when a god says sip, what he really means is to drink the whole thing. And that's what Odin did. With those 3 sips, he emptied each of the vats. And after he emptied all of the vats, just like in the original plan, in his original vision, he shapeshifted again into an eagle, and on the wind, his wings soared into the shadows, into the night. She knew what he had done, and she knew what he had taken. Behind him, he left only the anger of the giants. They howled like wolves. They were so angry that he had stolen the mead from the vats. They chased him, but they could not catch the eagle. He flew beyond the valleys. He soared into the sky. Wind was on his side. Odin tucked the mead into his throat, and he flew beyond the fjords, beyond the valleys, beyond the rivers, over the forests. The giants had their own eagle, and he was sent to chase Odin through the valleys, through the sky. Then the sky became a battleground. Wind cut like knives. Rain stumbled over both of them. Odin tucked the mead into his throat, and he poured all his strength into his wings, and he flew as hard as he could towards Asgard. The giant eagle came to take Odin like a debt you can't avoid. Heat from his breath slapped against Odin's neck, Claws as big as anchors reached for Odin. Odin rolled left, and as he did, a mouthful of mead rose in his throat. He fought it down, holding it there. The giant eagle came crashing down again, but Asgard lay just ahead. He could see the gold of Asgard. He was almost there. The gods opened the gates as he charged forward, and just before he reached the gates of Asgard, a few drops of mead spilled from Odin's mouth, and they flew through the air, and they landed in mysterious places. And some say that that's why there's bad poetry. Not all the mead reached the right throats. Some went to men who were proud, not skilled, but overconfident. Odin reached the gates, and he tumbled inside. He was exhausted, but he began to laugh because he knew he had made it. He knew the heist was successful. As soon as he entered, the gates were closed, and the giant eagle had no choice but to turn away. Once safe inside Asgard, Odin distributed the mead. He told his people, "Drink." And when they did, words woke like sleeping warriors. Now some of the mead stayed in Asgard, and some it rode on the wind, and it reached the Skalds of Midgard. And that is why they say that we have the stories of Norse mythology at all. As the drops made its way to Midgard, the sound of the world became very different. Traders boasted in poem. Warriors turned their grief into legend in honor of their fallen comrades. Sailors spoke in rhythms to the waves, and the ships, they seemed to respond. This was a theft and a lie and a broken promise, but it was also a rescue mission. Odin took the mead from the few that possessed it, that wouldn't share it, and he gave it to everyone. And the Norse world became more alive as a result. The tales took on legendary vision and poetic meaning. And that is one reason why Norse mythology still lives on today. So what does this all mean for you? What does this mean for me? The Mead of Poetry is not just a strange recipe. It's a big statement, a statement that in Viking times, words were just as important as war. A well-aimed verse could hit harder than an arrow or a sword. Skalds were not background singers. They are the ones that kept memories and reputations and sometimes destroyed enemies. Warriors, they killed the bodies, but poets killed legacies. In their world, your name was your life after death. Losing your name was worse than losing your life. This was why the mead mattered so much to the Norse. It wasn't just to make a god clever. It was a jailbreak to give humans the tools to outlast death. Poetry, it wasn't decoration, it was survival. So you look at Odin. He isn't a clean hero. He lies, he charms, he steals, and he changes shapes. Odin might even say creativity, sometimes it's messy. Nevertheless, Odin isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He gave his eye for wisdom, and he hung himself on a tree for runes. Here, he gives up his dignity temporarily to milk cows, to beg, to charm, to seduce, to steal. But Odin did it for what he would consider the greater good. The point isn't that he stole. The point is that when he did, he shared it, almost like a Robin Hood type of a story. Then there's some of the funny details, like when Odin spilled drops that became bad poetry. The Norse used this joke to explain why some poems land like thunder and others trip over themselves. They believed the divine inspiration was concentrated. If you had it, it's because Odin poured it from the true vat. If you didn't, you just caught a spit on the wind. Or maybe this was just the Norse way of saying not everyone who speaks is worth listening to. But the myth gave them a way to separate genius from nonsense. We also learn that Odin risked everything in order to get this mead. And when people share their creativity, sometimes it demands sacrifice, time, pride, putting yourself out there. Sometimes it's part of your soul. You open yourself up to criticism, to judgment. You risk a lot in order to be creative, just like in this podcast, for example. The myth also may have taught us something unintentionally, that the gift of poetry or the gift of artistry has a cost involved. And so we should respect those that have these gifts. What I want to talk about for a moment is what the Mead of Poetry meant to the Norse and the power of the word. Because here's the truth. Words have immense power. The Norse knew this better than any people. They knew the power of spoken word. Their history was of oral tradition. It was passed down through words, and words have power. And what we say to each other has power and has meaning. What we type on the keyboard and send in a chat, in a text, in a tweet, it all matters. Words have power. Some words will lift up and inspire people. Others are meant to tear them down. Don't use your words for the latter. Use your words for the good, to tell stories, to inspire people, to lift them up. In the Norse world, they had skalds. Skalds were storytellers. You might think of them as professional storytellers or authors of that day, except they didn't write their words on paper. They sat next to kings, and their words were memory. If you wanted to be remembered in Norse lore, you needed a skald to tell your tale. So then we can begin to debate whether the warrior's sword or the farmer's axe was the most dangerous tool in the Viking world, or was it the skald's tongue? You see, they're the ones that preserved family lines. They're the ones that told of victories. They're the ones that told what the law was. They're the ones that remembered everything. And in a world where things were not written down and codified, the memory was everything. Skalds were feared and respected. Rulers often kept skalds very close. A king without a skald was a king without a witness. No matter how many forts or ships that they built, if they didn't have someone to tell the story, to turn their deeds into verses and his legacy into something that lasted forever, kings could fade and disappear like fog on the fjord, just like anyone else. So kings gave poets rings and fine clothing, not because they liked to be entertained, but because they understood the stakes. A king might die on the battlefield, his hall might burn, but if a skald sang about him, if his story lived forever, then think about that. Think about Harald Fairhair, who united Norway. We remember him because skalds carved his name into words, words that didn't rot, that didn't fade, that didn't erode. And the lesson is clear. What we say about others can bless them with lasting honor or cause them to fade into nothing. In the Norse world, words built monuments to remember people by. The Norse believed that every skald they had drank from Odin's cup. Their gifts were not natural. They were part of that stolen mead dropped on their tongues, a gift from Odin, the Allfather himself. And so to the Norse, poetry was sacred. It was dangerous. It was alive. And of course, power works both ways. If a good poem could crown you, a cruel one could bury you. The Norse had a word for mocking. It was neath. Being the subject of one of these mocking poems was like social death. It attacked honor and standing and status. A society that cared about reputation cared a lot about these types of poems. Some men went as far as to challenge poets to duels over these type of poems. Others tried to outlaw these verses, but you couldn't really silence a skald. Once a line was spoken, it spread like fire through dry grass. This is why poetry was treated with awe and fear. One sip of mead could make words that outlast empires. Another sip could drop venom that poisoned families and bloodlines. The tongue holds life and death. So the next time you read a saga, think about this. The Norse looked at those words and those lines and those stanzas like they were echoes of Odin's Heist. The voices of Skalds who shared in the mead and shaped memory with words. Without them, Viking kings would have been forgotten. Many stories would not have been passed down. And if you think about what we have left from the Viking era, we do have some swords, all rusted. We have artifacts and elements of the Viking world, but guess what else we have? Words. Pure words. Words that are preserved by time. They're not rusted. They're not lacking. They are the window into the Viking world itself. But here's the reality. Whether you believe in the Mead poetry or not, here's what I believe. I believe that you have gifts and talents that you can use for the benefit of humanity. That your words matter and what you say can bless, inspire, and help people. On the contrary, the things that you say can hurt, tear down, and lead people into a darker place than they already are. So be careful with how you speak, how you use your words. So again, whether the Mead of Poetry is real or not, that's not the point. The point is how you use your words does affect people. The other thing is, if you have the gift of poetry, if you have the ability to write a song, to say kind words, to formulate and craft words in a way that is engaging, then it's like your responsibility to share that with someone. It doesn't have to be with the world like Odin shared the mead with everyone, but it should be with someone. You should share it. Don't be like those giants that said, all right, we've got the mead, we're going to hold it in vats, we're not going to open it up and share it with anybody. So use this as an encouragement to say that the gift that you have of poetry and writing and sharing, you have the ability to use your creativity to encourage and bless other people. And now I want to say thank you for listening to this episode. I appreciate you making it all the way to the end. And if you have made it to the end, make sure you do one thing. I would encourage you to use your words, write a review. Tell people that this podcast is something worth listening to because it's a glimpse into Norse mythology, but it's also a glimpse into how we can still learn from a culture that existed 1,000 years ago. That yes, as we look at the Vikings and we say, wow, they were such a fascinating group of people, what could they teach me? Well, they can teach us a lot. So tell people that they're going to enjoy it. Tell them that they're going to learn something. Tell them that there is a little bit of an unexpected twist in every episode. And then share the episodes. When they resonate with you, share them with other people. But liking and giving a review, that tells the algorithm that there's something here. And then the algorithm will push this podcast out into the platform where people that are fans of Norse mythology and the Viking Age will be able to listen. So we thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for listening to this plug here at the end. Until next time, be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you.